All right. So the Rules Committee will come to order. Transportation security officers are indispensable to keeping us safe when we fly. They screen more than 2 million passengers at airports across the country every single day. Yet these hardworking men and women are not given the same rights and protections as other federal employees. We're considering H.R. 1140 today to remedy this. This bipartisan bill transitions transportation security officers into the federal personnel system, strengthening protections for these officers and bringing their salaries in line with other federal employees. Taking these steps will not only help these workers, it will strengthen our national security as well. Having said that, I'm happy to turn to our ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, today's hearing covers H.R. 1140, the Rights for Transportation Security Officers Act of 2020. This legislation completely alters the statutory framework covering employees of the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA. If passed into law, H.R. 1140 would move TSA employees into the General Services pay scale, or onto the General Services pay scale, and would bring them under Title V with most other federal employees. While it may be well-intentioned, this bill does come with certain costs. It removes the flexibility that TSA has enjoyed since its inception and will limit the TSA's ability to move screeners where and when they are needed in order to meet threats or passenger demands. It removes TSA's ability to immediately dismiss employees that commit serious violations of the law, such as sexual assault, sexual harassment, fraud, or theft. And the policies contained in the bill are directly contrary to recommendations contained in last year's report of the Blue Ribbon Panel to the Transportation Security Administration on human capital service delivery, which specifically recommended that TSA not switch to the General Services system, calling it overly rigid and outdated. I understand that Republicans on the Committee on Homeland Security, which have jurisdiction over this measure, have expressed additional concerns about this bill. I look forward to hearing those concerns tonight. And before I yield back to my name, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit a statement of administration policy for the record, which it's noted that the President's advisor would recommend a veto should this bill reach his desk.
Without objection.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony in H.R. 1140, the Rights of Transportation Security Officers Act of 2020. Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Rogers, we're delighted that you are here. Anything you brought in writing will, without objection, be entered into the record. I now recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Chairman Thompson.
Thank you very much, Chairman McGovern, Ranking Member Cole, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss my bill, H.R. 1140, the Rights for Transportation Security Officers Act of 2020. I'm pleased to bring this bill before the Rules Committee with the strong support of the American Federation of Government Employees and the Transport Workers Union of America, as well as 242 bipartisan co-sponsors. The premise of the bill is simple, but its impacts are significant. H.R. 1140 would transition all TSA employees from TSA's self-managed personnel system to the time-tested system used by the vast majority of the federal workforce. As I described the bill, I ask you all to think about how often you fly and how often you interact with the men and women of TSA. Many of us fly every week and say thank you to the transportation security officers, or TSOs, who work on the front lines to keep the traveling public safe. These individuals are responsible for operating complex machines and following extensive security protocols to keep weapons and explosives off our planes. Unfortunately, our thanks does not help them pay their rent or put food on their tables. Despite their important work, TSOs are among the lowest paid workers in the federal government, with basic annual wages starting at about $29,000. Under TSA's system, TSOs are not afforded standard pay raises or retention pay. In fact, most officers, including those who've been with the agency for 10 or 15 years, are paid at or near the bottom of entry-level TSA pay bands. Unsurprisingly, it has led TSA to be ranked 415th out of 415th agency subcomponents, dead last on pay satisfaction based on the annual Best Practices Work Survey. Last year, during the government shutdown, we all saw the financial strain felt by TSOs who were left wondering if they could make their next rent payment or keep their children in daycare so they could go to work without pay to protect all of us. Failing to provide these critical workers a living wage represents an outrageous failure of government. To make matters worse, TSOs do not have access to the same basic workplace protections as the rest of the federal workforce. For example, TSOs cannot collectively bargain on the same issues as all other federal workers, such as processes for appealing disciplinary actions, because TSA management gets to decide what issues TSOs can arbitrate. Our failure to do right by the frontline TSA workforce has severe operational implications and is a major driver in TSA's chronic turnover problem. Just last year, Mr. Chairman, the DHS Inspector General released a report that found that over a two-year span in 2016 and 2017, 1 in 3 TSOs quit. High turnover makes it impossible for TSA to develop the expertise and professionalism needed within its workforce to counter the threats we face today. When Congress established TSA after the September 11th attack, the TSA administrator was provided great flexibility to design and manage TSA's personnel system to create a nimble system that improves upon Title V. 19 years later, it is clear this experiment has failed. TSA's system is not working for the vast majority of TSA's workforce. H.R. 1140 would rescind TSA's authority to establish and maintain its own personnel management system and transitions the workforce to the federal system under Title V. The Title V system offers structured rules for pay raises, bonuses, collective bargaining rights, disciplinary actions, and grievances that TSA current system lacks. Under my bill, most TSA employees will receive a raise upon conversion to Title V, as well as regular pay increases for those who continue to meet performance standards. Further, an employee who feels that they've been unfairly disciplined would have the opportunity to have their case considered by an independent party. Importantly, under Title V, TSA would maintain the authority to remove officers from screening if their presence jeopardizes national security. We owe it to the officers who serve on the front lines of our transportation system to provide them with appropriate pay and protections afforded to most other federal employees. We also owe it to the flying public to continue to develop TSA into the professional, capable national security agency that Congress originally envisioned. With that, I thank you for the opportunity to present my bill and urge the Rules Committee to approve an appropriate rule for this narrowly tailored but impactful bill. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Rogers, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern and Ranking Member Cole, for the opportunity to testify before you today on 11:30 with my colleague, Mr. Thompson. After the terrorist attacks of 9/11, Congress recognized that in order for TSA to successfully carry out its critical mission, it had to accommodate the agency's unique operational needs. That's why Congress acted and passed the Aviation Transportation Security Act. We gave TSA one-of-a-kind authorities to respond to evolving threats. TSA has used these authorities over time to remain flexible and accountable to the needs of a diverse transportation system where each airport faces unique threat landscapes. These flexibilities are key to keeping the public safe. That's why I'm very concerned about the impact that this bill will have on the security of our aviation system. By moving the screener workforce under Title V, this bill would eliminate many of those critical flexibilities. For example, current law allows for the immediate termination of employees that engage in significant misconduct, including those facing criminal prosecution. Currently, TSA is empowered to immediately remove an employee if they intentionally allow guns or knives or explosives through a checkpoint. Under this bill, that employee could remain on the TSA payroll for months or maybe even longer. Current law allows TSA to set new security requirements, such as enhanced passenger screening when intelligence indicates a credible threat. Under this bill, how new security requirements are implemented could be subject to negotiation with the union. In addition, the impact on security, I'm also concerned with how the bill proposes to transition the screener workforce. I don't think it's fair for Congress to dictate which union gets to represent 45,000 screeners, but that's what this bill does. The bill sets in law the exclusive bargain agent for the screeners and requires TSA to immediately negotiate with them. Under this bill, there's no intervening union election. Screeners never get a chance to exercise their constitutional right to choose their representation, and I think that's wrong. Beyond the consequences for aviation security and the fundamental questions of fairness, this bill does little to improve the pay and working conditions for screeners. In fact, TSA screeners will lose benefits under this proposal. If this bill becomes law, screeners will lose the ability to trade shifts with one another or to donate accrued leave to fellow workers. Certain overtime pay would be prohibited. Career milestone bonuses would no longer be offered. Many veterans would no longer qualify for hiring preferences. The TSA estimates that moving the screener workforce under Title V will cost the agency $1.2 billion over the next 5 years. That's a tremendous cost for such little reform. In May of 2019, a blue ribbon panel led by Clinton and Obama administration human capital experts, strongly argued against moving the screeners under Title V. That panel rightly pointed out that under current law, the TSA can pay screeners more than they would make under Title V. That's the real irony of this bill. It purports to improve pay and benefits for screeners, but under current law, screeners can be paid more and receive better benefits than this bill would provide. I've long advocated for increased pay for screener workforce, and I agree with the Blue Ribbon Commission that TSA should build a pay system superior to that of the GS schedule. If the majority truly wanted to fix this problem, they would have worked with us on a bill to implement the recommendations of the bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission. Instead, they've yet again decided to move a partisan messaging bill that rewards political supporters. This time it comes at the expense of taxpayers and our security. Like the rest of them, the partisan messaging bill will never become law. It's a waste of our time. At some point, I hope the majority rejects this partisan approach to legislating and works with us on our nation's priorities. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have no question. I want to yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't know of anything other than we're going to lose the ability to continue to obtain CT scanners and other equipment that we need to better enhance our security.
And can you clarify what the implications the bill would have for national security and the ability of TSA to carry out its mission?
Well, you know, the biggest problem is we're going to start having negotiations over emergency or over security screening and emergency directives by the president. That should not be subject to union negotiations. We need to keep the traveling public safe, and we have that flexibility under the current law, which Congress, I think rightly, decided to keep these employees out of Title V.
Well, you made one other point, and I just want to give you a chance to make it again. We had a bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission that recommended against moving TSA under Title V. Can you tell us a little bit about who that commission was and then what their reasoning was?
It was led by both Clinton and Obama's human capital experts. And their point was that if Congress chooses to give the money to TSA, which, by the way, the president has requested in this year's budget, the administrator can pay them much better than they're paid under Title V. It's our responsibility as a Congress that they haven't been properly funded. And they get retention bonuses possible under the current law. They will not have that ability under this bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hastings.
I have no questions. I appreciate both the witnesses. I would like to make a comment that I think that this is a particularly useful measure at this time. Like all of you, I go through airports, and I can tell you just on observation that the morale of the TSA personnel is very low, and I see it as our responsibility to do something about that.
Thank you. Mr. Woodall.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Mr. Hastings' point. I can't tell you the number of times I've been here where a chairman and a ranking member have come on behalf of federal employees and say, I think folks ought to get paid more. And the answer was, no, we're not gonna do that together. Mr. Hastings accurately says, these are our folks, and we've got a responsibility to make that better. I heard the ranking member say he wanted to work to make it better, but it sounds like the bill entrusts the union to make it better instead. I'm just wondering, because this is again, I think a relatively rare common framework of beliefs, why aren't we, the Congress, taking responsibility for this instead of punting it to someone else? Mr. Chairman?
Well, the only thing I can tell you, Mr. Woodall, is the employees at TSA decided they wanted representation. They had an election, and they chose that representation. This bill respects that representation. And if at any point they decide to change representation, like all other unions, they'll have that flexibility.
Well, in Title V, I certainly recognize that. But, great thing about being on the Rules Committee, subject matter experts come up here and make me smarter, and very few people watching on TV for my ignorance to be exposed. Mr. Chairman, no offense. What are our national security groups of employees today that are unionized? I don't think of my non-Title V employees as having that representation. I think of Congress saying, if you're in a national security responsibility, if your job is that important, then we've got your back as an institution, and we're going to provide that representation. Is that a misunderstanding of the way our national security employees are dealt with today?
Well, I think it is. We have unionized employees along the border, and they have not had any problems with not doing their job. If it was an issue around a threat to the border of those individuals, they always perform admirably in return. So I'm not aware of any instance where national security was ever compromised because of a unionized labor force.
Am I also misunderstanding that the Blue Ribbon panel had exactly that concern, that they cautioned against this approach? Again, not in a partisan way, and certainly not in an anti-union way, just in a pro-national security way.
Yeah, that same Blue Ribbon task force also talked about the fact that there was real discontent among the workforce at not being paid adequately. And I just said for the record, there was no TSOs on that Blue Ribbon panel. So the other part from that is, if you look at the record, TSA has not done right by the TSOs. An example is management fares very well, according to that Blue Ribbon report. One person received a $90,000 bonus in management. That's a lot of money for a year's work in terms of bonus. And so it cited some of the concerns they have. I'm convinced that if everybody was under Title V, those kind of egregious awards would not exist.
Mr. Rogers, Mr. Thompson said exactly what you said. Folks aren't being compensated at an appropriate level. Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me to enter the statement of administration policy,
We'll do it for the second time.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
For emphasis, we're happy.
Well, this one's different than so many of the others. This says the President's advisors would recommend a veto of this bill.
Without objection.
And I say that because, again, Mr. Rogers, you said you wanted to increase pay. Mr. Thompson has said it's critical to increase pay. You've both said you've heard it from the rank and file that pay needs to be increased. What's the opportunity to get that done? This bill doesn't do it even if it wasn't vetoed, but what then is that next opportunity? Is this the messaging document for the unions, and then there's an actual real pay bill coming right behind it?
Now, the fact is that the TSA administrator has told both of us he wants to elevate the pay for the TSOs. He's requested the money, it just hasn't been given by Congress. That's the only thing limiting, and according to the Blue Ribbon Panel, he would have the latitude of paying far more than they would get paid under Title V if Congress would appropriate the money. And as to the AFGE, I would point out that they already have a union. They're unionized now. The administrator can limit the things that they can collectively bargain over, but they do have a union. The thing that's a little bit of a problem with this bill, if it became law, is that union vote happened 10 years ago, and only a plurality chose AFGE, not a majority. And most of those employees are gone. We have high turnover in the TSA, unfortunately. And if they were to be under Title V, I think at a minimum they should be a new union vote, decide who they wanted for their representation, instead of us dictating who the winner is.
Is that right, Mr. Thompson? When you told me that the employees had already made their decision and said that 1 in 3 of them were quitting their job annually, are we relying on a vote that took place 10 years ago when virtually none of these folks were there?
Well, you're relying on a contract that's in existence as we speak. It does not count who's there. There's an existing union and contract for those TSO employees. So you have to abide by the contract.
Well, thank you both for being here. Mr. Chairman, are you back?
Thank you. Mr. Raskin.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Burgess.
I'm going to pass. Let's see if I can.
Scanlon, you, okay. Mr. Morelli? Ms. Shalala? This is like the fastest Rules Committee meeting like in history. So we are thrilled that you came, and we are done. And you can go.
Thank you much.
Thank you very much. Does any other member of the committee wish to, ask questions? Nobody else did, so we're done with the witnesses. Are there any other members who wish to testify on H.R. 1140? Seeing none, this closes the hearing on H.R. 1140. So, at this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1140, the Rights for Transportation Security Officers Act of 2020, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Homeland Security, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit with or without instructions. The rule provides that it shall be in order at any time on the legislative day of March 5, 2020, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15, relating to a measure making supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2020. The rule waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a 2/3 vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of March 5, 2020, relating to a measure making supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2020.
Thank you very much. You heard the motion from the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Any discussion or amendments? Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's hard. Our majority knew it was hard to make an open rule. We don't often get bills whose scope is as narrow as this one is. Bill's only 2 pages long. Germaneness, very easy to define. I have a motion that the committee provide an open rule for H.R. 1140. Again, I understand we can't do that on every bill, but so far we've done it on not any bill, and this seems like an opportunity to get the House back in the practice of hearing from one another.
Thank the gentleman. You heard the gentleman's amendment. Any discussion or comment? Hearing none. The vote is on the Woodall amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Roll call, please, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings. No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mrs. Torres. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala. Ms. Shalala, no. Mr. DeSaulnier. Mr. Cole. Mr. Woodall.
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mrs. Lesko. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk
no.
report the total.
2 yeas, 6 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Burgess.
not really an amendment, but I will tell you, I'm startled to see line 9 or paragraph 9, that basically we're going to be doing the Corona supplemental under a suspension of the rules this week. Mr. Chairman, we have not had but one very brief hearing in one of the major committees of jurisdiction, Energy and Commerce Committee, tacked on to Secretary Azar's budget hearing last week was about an hour's time for us to talk about coronavirus. Many of us have attended multiple briefings up here that were closed affairs. They weren't on the record. So the public really hasn't had a chance to hear us talk about what concerns us, what we like, what we don't like in the response so far. We don't, if I understand correctly, Mr. Cole had to leave early because we don't even know the number that will be associated with this supplemental. I just think in light of the fact that there's been not really a dedicated hearing in any of the committees of jurisdiction, the Rules Committee was going to be our sole chance to question the appropriators on how we arrived at a number that we don't even know what it is at this point. We don't know how the dollars are going to be allocated, how they're going to be spent. I, for one, you've included an amendment in the rule tonight from the gentlelady from Washington that says we're going to give proper guidance regarding prevention protections against coronaviruses to the TSA employees. I'd like to know what we're going to do to protect other frontline employees, our doctors and nurses in emergency rooms and clinics across the country. It would be entirely appropriate to have a Rules Committee hearing so we could discuss and vet some of these things and not just have it on a 20 minutes of debate on a suspension right before we leave town. That seems to me to be unconscionable for a crisis this order of magnitude.
Well, I think what would be unconscionable is for us to leave and not provide the necessary resources to actually deal with this. But having said that, let me say this rule allows us to bring this up under suspension. But in order to do that, you'd have to have a supermajority. There are bipartisan discussions going on right now. And Mr. Cole is going to talk to, I think, members of your conference right now to I guess, ascertain where they are. But it also provides same-day authority that if we need to bring up a separate bill and have a hearing in the Rules Committee, we will do that. So, nothing is a foregone conclusion here, but I would like to think that, we can have I would like to think it was possible that there could be a bipartisan agreement that everybody felt comfortable with, where we can move forward with a package to deal with this as soon as possible. Now, having said that, I mean, this supplemental in and of itself is not going to be the be-all and end-all in dealing with what we learn about it, which we're learning about every day. I heard Dr. Fauci refer to it as a pandemic today. So, I mean, I think that if there's angst by enough people that we need to bring this up as a separate bill, then we will do that. And we will come to the Rules Committee and we will bring it. This enables us to do that.
But if I may, the Rules Committee was our one chance to have a hearing that the public could view and hear how we're discussing this, what our thought processes are in coming to this number. I agree with you, this won't be the end of
Right.
it. I can guarantee you this won't be the end of
Yeah.
it. There will be additional dollars that will be required. This is the first step. But again, we've had so few hearings on this that it's startling to me. And it's not like we're on a torrid
we-
legislative pace
you
where
may-
we can't do
yeah.
anything else. We're not doing
Well,
anything.
you may-
We're not doing a budget.
Yeah,
We're not doing appropriations.
You may get your wish, and we will be up here having a hearing on this in the Rules Committee. But I would just say respectfully, I don't know about your constituents, but I think my constituents would prefer us to take action as soon as possible rather than listen to the Rules Committee pontificate on this. But whatever, it is, we have a number of options that are out here today, and I would suggest that you talk to your leadership about how they would like to proceed. I would like to think we could get this thing done quickly and as expeditiously as possible, but, you know, we're prepared for a number of approaches here. So nothing is a foregone conclusion.
Again, I just reiterate, the torrid legislative pace allows for a lot of time for us to discuss things, and I wish we would. I yield back.
Well, I've been listening to some of the commentary by members of the general public who are anxious for us to appropriate money as soon as humanly possible. Having said all that, I think that is there's no other amendments or discussion. Hearing none, the question is now on the motion offered by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Yes. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mrs. Torres. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, aye. Ms. Shalala. Ms. Shalala, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier. Mr. Cole. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mrs. Lesko. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk, report the total.
7 yeas, 2
Motion,
nays.
motion is agreed to. Ms. Scanlon will carry it for the majority. All right, that is it. What? Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.